Thank you all for joining us. I hope everyone's doing okay after this large earthquake this afternoon. If you're joining us from Nevada or Eastern California, I bet you got shaken pretty hard, but it looks like this event has not caused a great deal of damage, and we haven't heard of any injuries so far. So I want to give some basic details about the event. At about 3:29 local time this afternoon, a magnitude 5.9 earthquake occurred in Antelope Valley in Eastern California near the California-Nevada border. The maximum felt shaking that's been reported so far to the USGS was moderate to strong. That's enough to knock things over, really give you a rattle. You'd hear lots of sounds and get may get alarmed by that. Shaking was felt quite widely from San Francisco to east of Carson City in Nevada, and as far south as Visalia, California. Shaking-related effects that we've heard of so far include rockfall along Highway 395 near Colville. That's right near the epicenter of the earthquake. The earthquake is the result of normal faulting. It's a pretty well understood and expected mechanism for an earthquake at the eastern boundary of the Sierra Nevada mountains in the region that in which it happened. Our earthquake early warning system, Shake Alert, detected the earthquake 25.6 seconds after its origin. The system underestimated the original magnitude of that event and estimated a location that was slightly off from the true location. That meant that as the waves propagated across the state, other stations misregistered the event. So several different shake alerts were sent out for earthquakes in different areas. And people who joined and visited our site upon feeling it really early will have seen multiple different events show up sort of simultaneously. This is a fairly common thing that happens at the beginning as our instruments are just detecting and automatically sending signals from these earthquakes. And so it's something that's somewhat to be expected. It's worth noting that this earthquake, just like the large one that happened near Lake Tahoe a few weeks ago, happened at the border of the Shake Alert region. And so as we build out the system further and install more instruments in the remote locations at the margins of our state and the state that covers it, that's covered by Shake Alert, these sorts of errors will become less and less common. We have produced an aftershock forecast for this event. It shows that there's a 6% chance of one or more aftershocks larger than the initial earthquake. I'll emphasize that a 6% chance is far less likely. It's the particularly unlikely scenario. More likely, and as we've seen so far, there have been about 40 or more aftershocks so far, smaller ones than the main event. The largest one so far was a magnitude 4.5, and I believe there was just another 4.4 maybe 10 minutes ago. All this information you can sort of keep track along with the incoming information on our website, as many of us are doing. So this earthquake is not particularly uncommon for the region. It's a region with known active faults. This happened along the trace of a mapped fault, and it is the largest in the region since the magnitude 6.1 double spring flat earthquake, which was about 36 kilometers to the northwest in 1994. But there have been other earthquakes over the decades in this region. There have been about a couple dozen earthquakes larger than magnitude 5 in the last 50 years here. The instrumentally recorded ground motions across recorded by our sensors across the state are typical for this size of earthquake. So reports of shaking that we've had at large distances in San Francisco, in Las Vegas, are what we would expect for this event. And there was likely some amplification in places that are built on basin sediments and flat soils. That's the overview of the earthquake that that we just experienced here and the aftershocks that continue. As I said, it's within the realm of possibility that a larger earthquake will follow this one, as is the case with any earthquake, and is ultimately the case with even when earthquakes don't occur, as we live in earthquake country. So take this event, especially if it, whether it shook you hard or not, take it as a reminder to get yourself prepared for future earthquakes, and visit the USGS website for up-to-date information. I'm happy to take any questions that you have at the moment on any of this information or other information you'd like to know.
Okay, thank you very much, Austin. This is Paul Lauston again. In the chat, there was a question from Tim Sheehan. Does the fault have a name?
Yeah, this is the Antelope Valley Fault. And that's tentatively the name that we've given the earthquake, the Antelope Valley earthquake, although we recognize that the Antelope Valley that's on the California-Nevada border is a very sparsely populated area, and there is an Antelope Valley in Southern California that's much more populous. Nonetheless, the fault is the Antelope Valley Fault, and so for now, that's the relevant information.
Great. Thank you very much, Austin. I'm going to unmute Ron Lin here in just a second. I just wanted to make sure you guys are looking at the chat. In the chat, you will find a link to the earthquake event page that has tons of information on it, including that aftershock forecast that Austin spoke about. So without further ado, let me unmute. Ron, you're unmuted, so go for it.
Hey, this is Ron Lin with the LA Times. Thanks for taking our questions. 2 questions for you today. Can you talk about what you felt and where were you? And assuming you're in the Bay Area, can you explain, why some parts of the Bay Area felt it and other parts didn't, like me in Millbrae? And can you also talk more about the seismicity of the Walker Lane system? How often does it have big quakes? What's the maximum magnitude a quake can hit there? And is it a threat to places like Mammoth Mountain and Lake Tahoe? Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for the questions, Ron. Yeah, I felt the earthquake fairly strongly. I'm in downtown San Francisco, essentially on a relatively high floor, and I think that may have that certainly amplified the experience compared to neighbors and other friends around me who did not feel the earthquake. So there are a lot of reports of the earthquake being felt around the Bay Area, but it's probably not as widely felt as even one of the more local earthquakes that we had, for example, last week on the Hayward Fault, which will be, sharper and stronger to people living near the epicenter. So this one, because of its distance, was probably more perceptible in places that really amplify the sort of slow, distant waves. So like the high building that I'm in. As with any earthquake, there's also amplification in soft soils, basin sediments. So if you're living on a bedrock hillside or a ridge somewhere, you're less likely to feel the same strength of shaking as people who are living or working in the flatlands, basically. So that was the experience in the Bay Area. Certainly, if you're in Reno, Carson City, some of the bigger places in Nevada, this was a much stronger jolt for you there, but more than a jolt. It was probably a fairly good shake that was pretty alarming, understandably so. Your second question was basically how frequently, how commonly earthquakes happen along here. And, just in the last year, we've seen a fair number of earthquakes around this region. And I think it's not particularly uncommon. They're pretty representative. This is a classic place that geologists go to study the active faults that we know form the pretty dramatic topography when you go east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range and through Nevada. So this is just the latest among those. There was another one last year. You may remember the 5.8 Lone Pine earthquake, which happened farther to the south. In May last year, there was a magnitude 6.5, a fair bit farther east in Nevada. There are quite a few examples spanning the decades of these kind of magnitude 5 to 6 earthquakes happening in the eastern Sierra. Certainly, so the fault that this happened on is essentially a small portion of the Sierra Nevada frontal bounding fault system. So it's what constitutes that massive, majestic scarp that you see if you drive up Highway 395, visiting places like Owens Valley, Bishop, Mammoth Lakes, June Lake, all the way up to Reno. So this was a small earthquake along essentially that whole fault system, and that's a very active structure. It forms one of the highest relief mountain fronts in the United States.
Great, thank you for the question, Ron. And just a reminder, if you guys have had your questions answered, then just go ahead and lower your hand appropriately. Next, Dale. And Dale, can you please also let us know your affiliation?
Of course. Hi, Dale Kassler, Sacramento Bee, and sorry about the video. I just like to call attention to myself, I guess. You sort of touched on this a few minutes ago, but I mean, we're 200 miles away here in Sacramento. We usually don't feel earthquakes at all around here, and it's as if everyone around here felt it. Was there something about this earthquake that, for some reason, it just spread and spread and spread?
Yeah, based on the measurements that we have, this is not out of the ordinary earthquake in terms of the shaking intensities, either instrumentally recorded or reported to our Did You Feel It system, based on people's eyewitness shaking experiences. I think some things that may make this notable, it was a fairly large earthquake, and it's worth remembering that the magnitude scale is logarithmic, and every unit increase in magnitude is 10 times increase in the size of the earthquake, which ultimately means that a magnitude 5.9 earthquake shakes much more strongly and has a much wider reach than many others. So other comparable examples to this one would be things like the Monte Cristo earthquake last May, so a year and a couple months ago. And I think that was pretty widely felt, although it was in the middle of the night. So another factor here may be that it was at 3:30 in the afternoon, a time when probably people are sitting around awake, attentive. A lot of people just at work, basically, and were awake to perceive the waves from this large earthquake.
Very good.
Thank you. And if I could follow up, in the Farmington quake that was because in the initial ripple or the initial waves, it was just misregistered as its own quake?
Yeah, essentially, yes. The shake alert system, our instrumentation is sparse away from the large population centers, and as you go farther into Nevada, and the shake alert early warning system is structured to function for California. So this is on this earthquake really occurred right at the margin of the operational earthquake warning system, and in an area with relatively sparse seismic instrumentation. So what that means is that the initial magnitude takes a little bit longer to calculate, may have some greater uncertainty to it because there just aren't as many instruments there recording it. What that means is that if an earthquake, it's always a balance of speed. If we're trying to get early warnings out, we want to determine the magnitude and location of an earthquake as quickly as possible. But if you only have one or two stations reporting, you're going to have some rather large uncertainty in where exactly that earthquake happened. So in this case, the initial estimate of the location of the earthquake was a few tens of kilometers off, and that meant that as other stations registered the seismic waves, they actually registered them as a separate earthquake because they arrived at an unexpected time compared to what our systems forecast the wave arrivals to, how they forecast the wave arrivals to reach the stations.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Austin. Okay, next we have Tim Sheehan, and you please state your affiliation. Let me make sure you're unmuted. Needs right. One more.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm with the Fresno Bee, one of Dale's colleagues with the company. What I wanted to find out is, geologically, is this area prone to, you mentioned that this area is not uncommon to see earthquakes. I think in way past history, we're looking at volcanic activity. Is there any reason for anybody to get worked up about, the say the Long Valley caldera as a result of this quake, or is this just circumstance?
It's a great question, and we're talking about an area that in the Eastern Sierra, the Eastern California, is full of tectonic and volcanic features and activity. The Long Valley caldera, Mammoth Mountain, and the Inyo craters are a fair way south of where this earthquake happened, and so they're likely unrelated to the event that we had this afternoon. Furthermore, what we saw this afternoon has a source mechanism that is consistent with motion on a tectonic fault rather than having a volcanic source. And so in that regard, we have no reason to expect that it has anything to do with the volcanoes that are a fair bit farther south of it. And I don't believe that there are any volcanoes or any volcanic activity that's commonly registered anywhere north of that. So this is quite reliably a tectonic earthquake and a fair bit away from the active volcanoes that do exist.
All right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. Amanda de Castillo, could you please state your organization's name and feel free to ask your question.
Okay, hello. Yeah, Amanda Del Castillo with ABC 7 News here in the Bay Area. Wanting to know, historically, does the USGS in California report more earthquakes during drought years? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Amanda. It's an interesting question, and obviously one that will be on people's minds considering the confluence of the dramatic natural events that are going on around us. I think it's unlikely that drought has any impact on the production of tectonic earthquakes, and we have not detected any substantial changes in the overall rates of earthquakes in recent years or any fluctuations over the decades. So it's unlikely that there's an observable effect at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Austin. Are there any other questions from the group here? Okay, we will have a USGS feature story that will go up on the main USGS website here pretty soon, and we will keep our information updated there. I will try to post a recording of this call as well for reference for stories. Unless there's a larger event, we will not plan on taking more media inquiries this evening, but you can go ahead and send those to myself or Elizabeth Goldbaum. We can get those emails posted in the chat, but if you're looking for updates on the story, we will do that on the USGS main page. Okay, this is your last chance to ask a question.
I may jump in and just make one little addendum, which I noticed just as I was beginning the press conference here. The magnitude of the main shock at 3:30 this afternoon has been upgraded to a 6.0. That's nothing unusual, nothing to be worried about. This happens as information comes in the first minutes and hours following an earthquake. Magnitudes get refined and recalculated as more and more seismometers report and data is processed. So in reporting for the stories, that's the latest magnitude. You can always keep track on the USGS website. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's huge. Thank you very much, Austin. Okay, well, thank you for everyone's time, and we hope we won't be speaking to you anytime soon. Well, I'm just in jest. You're always welcome to call and reach out to us if you need something. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And thank you, Austin.
Thanks, everyone.